Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Barenblatt, co-founder of Fast Forward. Welcome, or maybe welcome back to Fast Forward Academy. Today, we're going to dig into user research. And if you are starting a nonprofit or thinking about starting one, then I think you obviously care a lot about people. So maybe this isn't news to you, but user research and talking to users is super important as you think about starting an organization, but taking it from an idea to a product and continuing to iterate. The users should drive the product and the solution that you build. And that's why talking to your customers throughout the process at various milestones is absolutely critical. Nobody knows this better than today's teachers. Yes, we have two teachers today who you'll meet in just a moment. First, a little bit about Fast Forward. Here at Fast Forward, we believe the best tech should be applied to the biggest social problems. And that's why we focus exclusively on helping tech nonprofits scale. Our main program is a tech accelerator for nonprofits. Almost 60 nonprofits have gone through this program, raising hundreds of millions of dollars and impacting almost 100 million lives. Applications for the program are due on Friday. So if you're interested, please apply or reach out to us if you have any questions. The program, given our small team, we can only take up to 10 organizations through the accelerator every year. So last year we published a tech nonprofit playbook because our goal is to really help more social entrepreneurs build the next great tech nonprofit. And now we are excited to be bringing the playbook to life with the Fast Forward Academy, which is this series of free classes on how to scale social impact taught by the tech nonprofit people who know it the best. Okay, quickly, a couple things. One, today's class is being recorded. Please stay on mute. If you're not speaking, no Zoom bombing. And during Q&A, if you have a question, you can use the raise your hand feature, which is at the bottom in the reactions button. And if you don't see the reactions button or raise your hand, then use chat to let us know that you have a question. All right, let's get started. Quickly, I want to thank our partners without whom we could not do any of this. eBay Foundation and Comcast Business, both of whom share our commitment to empowering underrepresented entrepreneurs to build a stronger and more inclusive world. And I also really want to thank our premier and sustaining partners, Google.org, BlackRock, HPE Foundation, Twilio.org, GM, and Okta. All right, let's get going. Today's teachers are Geordie Graham and Mardi Daley at Ample Labs, which is an alum of Fast Forward's Accelerator and a tech nonprofit that is empowering those facing homelessness using technology. Their main thing is Chalmers, which is a chatbot connecting people in tough situations to critical services. Geordie is the Chief Product Officer at Ample Labs and has 8 years of experience in UX design and research. Mardi Daley is the founder of Lived Experiences Lab and a volunteer user researcher at Ample Labs. And she's also a youth mental health and homelessness advocate and researcher. With that, let's kick it off. Please join me in welcoming Geordie and Mardi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. So thanks so much for attending the class today. So we're going to be talking about how to build the product your user needs. This is something that Mardi and I have experience with, and we're looking forward to kind of sharing some of our insights and best practices with you to actually kind of further your development with the idea that you're coming with. So I'm going to just kind of quickly go over the agenda for today. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at Ample Labs to give you some context, as well as kind of share a little bit about our journey. The next we're going to talk about is user research for tech nonprofit. There's a lot of user research articles out there in the world and a lot of experience, but most of it is geared towards discussing what it's like to be a for-profit doing user research. So we wanted to kind of share a bit of a different experience and give you a little bit more perspective. Next, we're going to be talking about good user research practices. And then we're going to have Mardi actually kind of take it over and discuss research ethics. And then, most importantly, I'm really excited to be able to kind of take questions and kind of facilitate things. Something too, as you're kind of participating in this activity, I want you to kind of know is, keep it, feel free to kind of chat in the chat box. First off, like share your name, where you're from, maybe some, interesting, things that you want to know about user research, so that we can kind of keep that kind of in context as we're going through this presentation. So with that being said, I'm just going to kind of go into the next kind of first, activity, which is really, what do we do at Ample? So, kind of in a nutshell, we are talking about Ample Labs is something that we focus with, people who are experiencing or may experience homelessness. We take a bit of a different approach. A lot of, focus that we think of is the idea of, folks that are experiencing like chronic homelessness, transitional homelessness. So these are folks that are kind of in shelters and receiving services, or it might be kind of living rough on the streets. And one of the big focuses we have is really on people who are at risk or hidden homeless. So these people might be couch surfing, they might be, sleeping in their car, they might be like moving from family to family member. And the key thing is these people often aren't counted in the official statistics of people experiencing homelessness, because they're not actually accessing the standard services that people, like for example, emergency shelters that people are actually using. And so with this, it presented kind of a pretty kind of daunting, but also a challenge for us, and for how do we design a solution to engage with people that don't actually fit in the statistics, that aren't easily they're not easy to actually find. And so to do that is really around embracing user research. And so with user research, we're able to find opportunities to actually connect with people, and within those opportunities learn about their experiences in their lives, and their preferences and what motivates them, and tools that they use to really craft a meaningful solution that benefits them. And so user research is really about focusing on understanding people's needs, motivations, behavior, to help you kind of guide those kind of design and development solutions and services that you're looking to build to support people. And so within user research itself, it really is our secret sauce. Like this is one of the areas that we can really have that kind of deep understanding of how to get into those spaces, how to actually build services that are meaningful. And within it, being a nonprofit presents you with some unique opportunities. And one of the big things that we leverage is something called skills-based volunteering, where we actually have people participate in our research projects as researchers, where we're able to have people actually volunteer their time, for example, professionals in this area, to be able to achieve kind of tasks and activities. And so this is actually hugely beneficial for kind of multiple, all parties involved. First, as a tech nonprofit, we don't have lots of resources that a typical corporation does. At the same time, there's a lot of people who, work and they're looking to give back. And when we think of volunteering, we often think of volunteering as, the stuff that we did when we were younger, where it might be, going and helping people like pack boxes or doing those sorts of activities. And sometimes when we think of skills-based volunteering, we think of like lawyers and accountants to actually that are able to kind of volunteer time. But there is actually a richer world, developers, designers, user researchers, they're eager to give back. It's just they're not normally communicated, that there's actually a world out there that actually want of people that you can work on high impact projects to actually give those skills back to. And so for them, they get the opportunity of having meaning and understanding. And also some of them, if they're interested in a career change, like a designer wanting to be a researcher, or someone who wants to learn a little bit more about the field, and they're starting out and they want to do it in a safe way, this is an opportunity to help them grow their career or even accelerate their career. Now, the big thing though is how do you do research as a tech nonprofit? Well, obviously we mentioned some of the practices around working with skills-based volunteering, but there's also the approaches aspect as well. And so, in terms of how we generally do research at Ample Labs, we approach, research at Ample Labs, with focusing often on, good practices and kind of like standard methods in terms of how to actually participate. So, we try to follow best practices in terms of our industry, and the other, which has the benefit of, getting good, consistent, high quality results and data that we're able to make decisions off of. So I'm going to kind of go through kind of like 4 of the major ones that we most consistently use. So, first off being user interviews, second, journey mapping, the third being surveying, and then kind of finally usability testing. And so we'll be describing them in a little bit more detail. So the first is really we look at user interviews. So user interviews are basically guided conversations. And so you go in, you have kind of a sense of what you're kind of wanting to learn a little bit more insight on, and then you kind of facilitate it. So you're getting that qualitative information from someone about their experiences. And from there, you're able to kind of begin to kind of paint a picture and get some meaning. So they can be like, very, very scripted, or they can be a little bit more free flowing. It really depends on, how much, what you're specifically looking for in terms of information, how much information, an insight are you trying to get, and also how much time you have. If it's 5 minutes, you're going to have to be pretty, you're probably going to go fairly high level. But if you have an hour, you might be able to go, very, very in depth. And from there, you're probably going to want to really, really prepare what you're trying to do to make sure you kind of use the best, the best time that you've got. The other major one that we do is kind of journey mapping. So this is fun. I actually find journey mapping is really exciting. So from there, it's really talking about a visual representation of kind of the user's journey through an experience. And so it helps you tell that experience, and you can communicate it through so many different audiences. Like internally, it's really helpful because, for example, people who don't directly work with users can kind of get some kind of understanding and context of what they're going through. Then you have, for example, if you're dealing with external stakeholders, and they're looking for impact, you're able to kind of communicate that story as well. It really helps you understand kind of that grander narrative. And that's a big thing within, user research activities is like, you want to have the understanding of that kind of bigger story of what folks are going through to be able to kind of create that meaning and figure out where that thing that you're trying to support them with fits in that story. The next one is surveying. So this is something that a lot of folks, when they think of user research, they often think of like working with computers right away and getting feedback on apps. But surveying is actually a critical part in 2 kind of major areas. So it does help you kind of qualify concepts, understand what's going on within specific audiences. But we kind of used it in 2 major areas. So one is like, especially with COVID, it gives you an opportunity to kind of like get feedback from people. You don't have necessarily the opportunities you normally would right now with, being able to like go into, specific places. Like for us, we're not able to go into shelters like we used to. And it helps you kind of gather a snapshot of what's going on. And at the flip side, you also have, the benefit of, for example, if you're trying to do interviews, where you can kind of learn a little bit about who you're going to be talking to see if they're the right people that you need to talk to for that activity. And so the last one I think we were kind of mentioned earlier is around usability testing. So this is when you kind of have a solution and you want to make sure that, you're kind of going to people before you kind of like send it out to the world. You're getting that feedback. You're testing to see if it actually works with the people that you want to actually support and help, to make sure you don't release it into the world and then get a lot of feedback that you then have to go back to the drawing board after you've to spend all of that kind of time in developing a system, which could be like paying engineers or it could be in developing a program. It's really designed to kind of de-risk it right before you kind of have jump in and make a full commitment to what you're building. And so what are some good user research practices? So now I've kind of gone over the methods. These are kind of like 6 core things. There's a lot of kind of best practices, but I'd say when it comes to, like, from my experience working on it, the kind of 6 that really stick in my mind are around, compensating people, looking at mutual value, thinking about your biases, being mindful of how much data you collect, making sure you have the right people to help you with your sessions. And as I'm talking about speaking, in the context of sessions, speaking a little bit less on yourself and letting the other person that you're working with speak a bit more. So I'm going to kind of focus, on the first 3, which I'd say are really the biggies of the biggies. And really that is that fair value piece. You're taking someone's time out of their day. If you're focusing on, for example, like marginalized folks, really thinking about the fact that, like, they're experts at what they're going through, and if you ask someone, if you would go and talk to a doctor and try and get feedback, would you pay that doctor for their feedback? And a lot of people would be like, of course, it's a doctor, their experience is really valuable. Well, the folks that have lived experience, their experience is valuable, and it needs to be, treated as such. Also, paying people, gives that person that extra piece of, that it shows them that they are treated as someone who's valuable, that their experiences are valuable. And then on the flip side for you, it means that people are much more committed to, attending your work that you're doing. You're getting less no-shows, and your engagement level tends to be a lot higher. So it really is also going into that second piece, that piece of mutual value. It benefits them and it benefits you. And you should, this is something that's really, if you can do it, really try and focus on that opportunity to create that mutual value. You don't want a situation in which, you're coming into a situation, you get all of this great data, and then the person on the, that you've worked with, is left in tears because they've just recounted a bunch of horribly traumatic experiences on their end. So the goal is you want to leave the person in, a neutral or better state than when you kind of had, whatever interaction you had with them. And at the same time, you obviously want to get more information to understand, what the problem you're trying to work and understand is. Third one, check your biases. So, with that, big focus is on making sure that you don't have any biases, coming into it, because it can affect your data if you're thinking in a biased way, or it can actually affect the person you're trying to work with. So think about, those activities around, like, are you, thinking about things? Are you making assumptions, for example, of, person's pronouns, or are you making assumptions based on how you think of the problem space, how you think that this person should be feeling or experiencing? Because the goal is, to really make sure those are reined in so that it doesn't affect how you think and it doesn't affect their experience. So, some other approaches to kind of think about in terms of, when it's not working with your, necessarily the participants, but just your ways of working on your team. Don't over collect information. I see this a lot, where, people are doing, screener surveys for people. And, I see, for example, someone's gender there. And I'm like, do we need the gender? Like, do we need to know this information? Because this is all going to get stored here, and being careful that the personally identifiable information that you collect is really important, because you don't want to have more than you need, because it is the internet, we store things online, we don't want to have, information that just doesn't need to be collected. It also creates a comfort situation. If you've got 27 different questions about, personal details, it can make people feel uncomfortable. You could prevent people from, getting recruiting into the studies that you're doing, because it's just, people might not necessarily feel comfortable with what you're doing. So always do that checkup. Do I need this? And, because it's also a situation where if they ask you questions, you have really clear, responses to why you're collecting information you're collecting. This one's pretty kind of simple and fast, but if you can have a facilitator and you can have a note taker, that makes your life so much easier. If you're taking notes and facilitating, I'm pretty good at that, but it's one of those things where it's like, it's not the best experience because you're thinking, you're having to listen to what they're saying, ask the questions in writing. And it's a little bit of it's not the best time. Also too, it tends to tire you out pretty fast. So, you know, and that way, if you're facilitating, you can focus on speaking and you can have another person just focus on writing, and it's the most effective. The next one is kind of, you know, also too around speaking less, listen more. Active listening is great for user research because it allows you to really understand things. And really you're letting the other person talk about your experience. One quick tip, you know, if you've got, you know, an empty pause, sometimes we love to fill things with silence. But if you say 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then speak, you might find that the person actually starts speaking and gives you some of the best research that you get as they get more comfortable and they share things. So just really quickly, research ethics is really about the analysis of kind of ethical issues in research. The key thing is that, you know, it's around how do we best make sure we're protecting humans, we get great research in terms of that thing that's beneficial for communities, and ethical soundness in the research that we're practicing.
Awesome, thank you, Geordie. Can we go to the next slide? Hey everyone, so my name is Marty. I'm a peer specialist, engagement advisor, and entrepreneur, founder of Lived Experience Lab. So you might hear the shuffling of papers as I go along. I'm a bit old school that way, but today I'll be telling you a little bit about my story within hidden homelessness and how this has been applied to my career and my path and to our topic today about meaningful engagement and ethical inclusion. So working with this thing called lived experience, it doesn't happen by mistake. It is the accumulation of adverse events, caring people, and willfulness to keep moving forward despite inequities and challenges that we may face along the way. My lived experience is grounded in youth and family homelessness, which began around the time I was 7 years old. It was largely hidden, even from me, if I might say, because I perceived my life as fairly normal, as fairly mainstream. I went to school every day, I had a lunch, I played soccer on a team, I even attended weekly private art classes. But the darker side of my story is that when my mom and I had our own place, we didn't necessarily have a phone or internet, not a cell phone even. And so I ended up making this whole system for myself in order to continue this mainstream life in the best possible way. So for example, I would go to the library to use the computers for schoolwork. And at the same time, back in the day, I would also get a bunch of CDs from my favorite band, burn them onto another CD, and then go to the park because that was how I decided to spend my day. So what that looked like was never having people over in my own space and rarely going to other people's homes. So in a sense, I was raised by the community and a beneficiary of other people's kindness, perceived as another child in their home. And I'm really grateful for that because it allowed me to see other lifestyles and be exposed to ideas that I may not have been. But as I grew older, I actually became aware of how abnormal my situation was. And I started to feel shame because of that. I vividly remember being 15 years old, sitting in the lobby of a shelter that I had already been to 4 years before doing intake with my mom. And I was just really angry because like, how could I end up in the same place again? And I heard a familiar voice call my name and they said, Mardana, which is my real name, what are you doing back here? And it was my favorite staff. It was someone that I considered a role model who probably hoped that they would never see me again. Not because they didn't like me, but because that would make me another statistic, another kid in the system experiencing the vicious cycle of homelessness. And so like other things, I got through it somehow, and I got through it until the next time that it happened. But the next time that it happened was different because everything had changed. Now at 17, I had a few scholarships in my pocket. I was about to graduate high school, and then the eviction notices started arriving under the door again. So instead of fighting it, I decided to pack my stuff and leave. And this was one of the best decisions that I made. I was able to stay with a friend's family who lived down the street from my school, started working part-time. And when summer came along, I couch surfed until I could get to university where I had residents waiting for me. So all of this is happening while, you know, I'm meeting up with my friends. Hey, how's it going? Let's go watch a movie. What do you want to do tonight? Very, very hidden. And I'm telling you this because being homeless, however you define it, is not an exclusive situation. Because I'm sure a lot of you actually know someone that may have experienced this, and you may have even stepped in to help. But we can't treat homelessness as something that's over there happening to those people because of their poor decisions, because this is something that could really happen to anybody. Moving on, eventually I did get the help that I needed. Oh, not the slide, not yet. I did get the help that I needed, and I realized how much on autopilot I had been. So again, 21, found myself living in an unlivable situation, in a bachelor, feeling dehumanized and alone because I was surrounded by the story of my life, chronic homelessness. Oh my God, I've been homeless my whole life and I didn't even realize it. And I'm surrounded by pests that I've never had in all this time and feeling depressed and, you know, at my lowest low. That's when everything changed. I stumbled into this thing called peer support, which was a way for me, supposedly, at the time supposedly, because I had no idea what it was, to mentor others from my own lived experience. So why is all of this relevant? Even though I was feeling depressed about, you know, life, I wasn't jaded by the system because I was someone who actually benefited from the system. So I trusted it to always have my back. And you know this, and I'm sure if you don't know it, you will find out. This is not the case for most people. Most people do not trust the system. They do not think it has their back for good reason, because historically it has not, right? So working with this attitude, I was able to get ahead and ask for help when I needed it because I thought, I've always gotten what I needed. Why would that change now? So I pushed on through and was able to pursue peer support on this cool project called the Housing Outreach Project Collaborative. So in the bottom picture to the left, that's those are a few members of the research team up in a place called Thunder Bay in Ontario, there for a project. And so the HOPC project was really interesting because it was a post-housing intervention and collaboration for youth that had been chronically homeless, like myself, who had then been recently housed, like myself, and were given wraparound supports, which included mental health support, case management, and peer support. It was also a pilot study, which means that it was a mess. So myself and the other peers, we did not have clearly defined roles. Our pay was not equal, even though we were doing the same work. The emotional labor that we were putting in by being a support to someone else was not considered, as we were fighting our own battles at the same time. So I was this person who showed up in good faith every week to this meeting because I just thought these people have everyone's best interest in mind. Again, as you immerse yourself into your research careers, you'll see this is not the norm. And one of the problems that came up was that this engagement was optional. So we're trying to do a study where we have to see how many times, how are people engaging, and they weren't engaging. So how do we fix this problem? Can we go to the next slide? Great. So engaging with people with lived experience. Essentially, invite the community you're working for into the process to build a product or research that is more true to what the community needs. So ethically engaging with people with lived experience involves partnering with stakeholders. And partnering with stakeholders means that we have to create meaningful engagement. But what actually makes engagement meaningful? Engagement becomes meaningful when it feels safe. Just for a start, are you taking account of the power structures that are in your research teams? Are the locations that you're trying to meet people at safe to them, or are they places that they would never go because they have a history of trauma associated to it? Have you taken account of other people's obligations? They have a life outside of research, maybe they have dependents. And so engagement becomes meaningful when people are actually able to communicate those needs and they are heard, they are received, and we adjust ourselves in order to make it better for them. Another aspect of meaningful engagement is language. Language is so important because it tells others what you really think and how you conceptualize the issue. Partnering with stakeholders at an advocacy level means that you let go of the script. Participants become in charge of their own stories. When we ask them to read over something and it's like, you shouldn't call us homeless youth. We don't like that. Respect that. What should we say instead? Ask that question. There are a lot of forms of partnering when it comes to working with people with lived experience. I'll try to blast through it because it's a lot of information, but you can also ask questions after and we can expand. Partnering can happen in the research process at every stage. There's an advantage to having researchers with lived experience actually. And that advantage is the added value that this person is coming from the community that you want to examine. They can also communicate to the community in a way that you probably can't. So that means that they can engage in a culturally appropriate way, an empathetic way, a non-stigmatizing manner, and a non-tokenizing manner. And this counts for a lot, as we know, in 2021 with the state of the world. So another form of partnering, if you can go back one slide, just to bring an example to life, you see that My Guide in the middle of the page. And so this is a really cool product that came from the HOPSI project. And what was interesting about this was that it was peer-led or participant-led. My role was just to facilitate and make sure that the process was moving along. The participants were given creative freedom. So they were able to pick the font styles and fill up this guide with different resources that were important to them. The only question that I gave them was, what would you have liked to know 5 years ago that you now know? And they decided, we're gonna make a bullet journal, we're gonna fill it with recipes, we're gonna do activities you can do at home. They had all these things that I would have never thought of, even though I was coming from the same experience. And they're able to put that together. So this is just an example of what happens when engagement becomes meaningful. How did they come along? It was the idea that it was summer, we had some extra funding. What's better than a summer job for youth, right? So hiring them on, making sure they're paid for their time, teaching them along the way, but also just being a secure person in the space that was safe, especially when you're dealing with strangers. So last, I'll just talk about valuing lived experience. I'll read that slide at the end. Thank you. Just for time purposes. So valuing lived experience happens at 3 levels. The first level is at an organizational level. So that means yourself, everyone in the audience, the people that you work for, if you work for yourselves, the same thing. How do you value lived experience? Like, why would you? The first reason is that it shows trust and willingness to engage with community stakeholders, bridging that gap between theory and practice. It offers a form of social good and helps you actually build a relationship with the people that you will be going back to in the future. The second level is the individual level for the participant themselves or the user. By valuing lived experience and including them, you're giving someone a sense of agency and purpose. It is an alternative form of work that's now an emerging industry where people like myself can get jobs. Quite amazing. And this, of course, puts money back into our pockets. It compensates for our time. And for some folks, it can actually offer healing, to be able to talk about these things in other groups. The last way that we can value lived experience is at the product level, of course. So why would we? It gives an opportunity for critique and prototyping in a more, in a more frequent way. You're getting relevant feedback from a population who may not be visible, but are still definitely a part of your users. And it actually can generate approval within an ethical process of inclusion. So remembering that people talk, if you've done a bad job, chances are that it will trickle down the pipeline. So remembering that all of our actions have an impact. And we can go to the last slide to wrap it up. The way to think about this, I heard this at a training recently and I thought, what a great quote to think about research. The research project is a relationship. You are responsible for honoring the person's needs and agency in that relationship.